What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, we have a good one for you, and it couldn't have come at a better time. We're talking about the early round wide receivers. Some of you may be preparing for your draft in the next couple of weeks. Others may have already drafted and just want to get breakdowns on players that are on your team. Whichever one applies to you, you came to the right place. We're going to be going over the early round wide receiver targets that we prefer. Keep in mind though, you may not have access to draft each of these players based on where your draft selection spot is. You're not going to be able to get some of these late first, early second round wide receivers if you do have an early first round pick. Regardless though, we do have targets at each stage of the early rounds and we'll get right into them. But if you guys could, give this video a like, it really helps the channel, and if you're new, you should subscribe. We're going to be posting content during the season. We're talking waiver wire, trade targets, and you definitely don't want to miss out on that. So, give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and let's get into the stat of the day. Yesterday's stat of the day was there were 6 running backs from week 7 on that had 20 or more carries of 10 plus yards. Those running backs, Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon, Chris Carson, Nick Chubb, and Ezekiel Elliott. Who was the 6th? It may surprise you to hear, but it was actually Phillip Lindsay. At first glance, I would have thought it was Christian McCaffrey. He definitely had a stellar second half of the season, but no, it's actually Phillip Lindsay. Congratulations, the D-Money81. You got that one. Who can get today's question right? And it's about specifically these early round wide receivers. Michael Thomas last season had an astounding 83.3% catch rate in the red zone, catching 30 of 36 passes. That is insane to think, especially with that type of volume. Which one of the early round wide receivers had the second highest red zone catch rate? We'll give you a hint. He's somewhere in this video, but you're going to have to stay tuned to find out. But with that, let's get into the early round targets. The first wide receiver target we have is actually Odell Beckham Jr. of the Cleveland Browns. And I know to some of you that's probably surprising because he's actually ranked as the 5th wide receiver coming off the board based on current ADP. So for us to be mentioning him first, you probably weren't expecting that. But when you really think about it a little bit deeper, you can see where we're coming from. And it's really because of how special he is as an actual talent. He's one of the most gifted athletes in the entire league, and he's on an offense. I would be more shocked if it finished outside of the top 10 than I would be if it finished outside of the top 5. If you've been following anything from the training camp footage, their preseason performances, this team has really backed it up, and it seems like they have a good thing going, even with the coaching staff that's a little bit unproven. So we've seen enough. Yes, there are the concerns. I mean, he has been injured for several years now. He has hurt fantasy teams because of that. He always has some sort of drama off the field, and there's almost certainly going to be a reduction in targets. But we will tell you, the reduction in targets should not be looked at as a total detriment to him, because the lack of actual volume he's going to be receiving is going to be made up for in efficiency. You may be surprised to hear this, but last season, he averaged over 1.5 fantasy points per target, and that was with Eli Manning. With Baker Mayfield throwing him the ball and being put in much better scoring position, Odell Beckham can take a slant to the house at any moment. Baker Mayfield's the type of quarterback that can deliver him the ball. And while there are other weapons, really solid weapons, he's likely going to be seeing the least defensive attention he has seen in his entire career. So the same stuff that we are disliking about him could be seen as a positive depending on the way that you look at the situation. And one thing not talked about as often as we would have expected is Duke Johnson's gone. Say what you want about Johnson and his involvement in this offense or what it was supposed to be. He was going to be targeted. Now he's not on the team. So those targets are going to be distributed and it's going to have trickle-down effect to Odell Beckham. We said over 1.5 fantasy points per target. A few of those go his way. We're already talking about stuff that right away impacts his weekly fantasy production, but it's still going unnoticed and untalked about by most. But you know this now. You know we have him marked as a target. And the best part is he's the 5th wide receiver off the board, which means if you really want him, you could probably get him. With the emphasis on running backs, I could see a lot of people going for a running back with their first pick just to secure that and taking what's left at the receiver position. So if you do have a late first round pick, consider Odell Beckham. Me personally, I like this next guy just a little bit better, and that's Michael Thomas of the New Orleans Saints. Why I like him so much is he's just super safe. He's already breaking records. He's been a wide receiver 1 since entering the league, and that's not about to change right now. He's consistent. His quarterback's consistent. The stat of the day, I told you how good his hands are in the red zone, and we can't forget about one of the best factors of him. He always remains healthy. Julio Jones, Odell Beckham, Keenan Allen. These guys have in the past let fantasy owners down. He's got the combination of floor, he's got the combination of ceiling, and he's on also one of the best offenses in the league. And Drew Brees, I have a feeling this year is going to be out for blood. He had 2 seasons in a row where he had heartbreaking losses in the playoffs, and they all came down to one play. I believe that he's not going to let it come down to one play, and he's going to try to set the tone early. Michael Thomas is going to be a real big part of that. Following Michael Thomas, we have Julio Jones. And man, if you want me to take a bet on who's going to lead the league in receiving yards, I mean, you'd be stupid not to take Julio Jones. He's super consistent when it comes to his end-of-season numbers. His week-to-week consistency could be a little bit better, but I will admit, I would much rather have him seeing the right side of touchdown variance at the tail end of the year like he did last season than having a hot start and just fizzling out. So we shouldn't come into this season with a pessimistic attitude and the injury concerns that we had always known when it came to Julio. Every year that we get removed from that, we start to worry a little bit less. Could these foot injuries resurface? I mean, there's always a chance. But him proving to stay healthy recently has gone a long way in giving us his confidence. So yes, he can hurt you when he doesn't score touchdowns. But like I said, he was looking good towards the tail end of the year. Someone like Adam Thielen, who faced quite the opposite. He started really hot and then fizzled out. I'm much more confident in a player like Julio who would have stepped it up, as opposed to someone like Thielen who had some offensive changes that didn't go his way, a volume player who wasn't receiving as much volume on an offense that wasn't all that explosive. It's important that we talk about the upcoming draft. You have to be prepared. Consider getting the draft package. You're going to get so much information in there, but don't feel overwhelmed. If you just need the bare minimum, taking the rankings and the player outlooks will do you enough justice. But keep in mind, there's so many more benefits. We're talking projections, risk ratings, machine learning model predictions predicting the outcome of NFL games over under spread and money line. And that's not even factoring access to all of the in-season content. And being part of the community is probably the best feature that you're going to get for that small price. It's a really good resource. We'd like to have you guys come on. The next player is Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And the good thing about Evans is he's not being drafted at the price of all of those other high-end wide receivers. But when you actually look at your roster after the draft, you feel really good about having Mike Evans as your wide receiver 1. Much better than somebody who has to start out with like T.Y. Hilton, Keenan Allen. It just does not feel as good. So we have him actually in a tier ahead of those players. And it's pretty simple why. Well, I mean, 5 straight years, 1,000 yards. Yes, he had touchdown variance, but it impacts any player. Michael Thomas even, 9 touchdowns, 2 of his 3 seasons. The 3rd season, he had 5, and that really does impact a player's fantasy value. But overall, he's always been a main focal point of this offense. And what's he going to be this year? The same thing he's always been. Except now there's 172 vacated targets from Adam Humphries and Deshaun Jackson. And even though Chris Godwin, OJ Howard, they're going to get a bump for sure, you know Mike Evans is undoubtedly going to have an increase as well, which is hard to imagine because he's already a player who is so heavily targeted in that offense. And this offense should be better this year. Bruce Arians is a really good offensive-minded head coach. What we've seen from training camp and preseason leaves you to be excited, especially if you are a Buccaneers fan, because it's going to be interesting to watch. OJ Howard and Chris Godwin, they're no joke. Those are athletic monsters. Jameis Winston himself, I've never seen him look better. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to hype this team up too much. It does have a lot of growing pains to go through. But Mike Evans, I did say he was a tier ahead of the next players behind him. But there is a player in that tier that we do like to grab. It's actually Amari Cooper. And with Cooper, it's really difficult to trust him because we're so used to what he was able to put together in Oakland. Inconsistent hands, inconsistent volume. I mean, he let Michael Crabtree overtake him as basically the main receiver in the offense. And you can't do that if you're expecting to be touted as one of the best receivers in the league, which he does believe that of himself. And I'm sure there are people out there that believe that too. And while I don't necessarily think he's at that level, he's definitely a good fit for this offense. He's going to get consistent volume. Dak, he's not elite. He can't make all the throws, but he is pretty accurate. And Amari Cooper, he fit right in with him right away. I don't know how that happened so well. It was basically the polar opposite of what happened with Golden Tate. It's just a significant upgrade for both of them, and I really see them putting together a really solid season, and we're going to get the most consistent version of Amari Cooper that we've ever seen in his entire career. We're in the 4th round now, and there's 3 receivers left. Brandon Cooks, and he right now is very unfairly ranked. He's had 4 consecutive seasons with 1,100 yards and doing it with 3 different quarterbacks. And the way he performed with Jared Goff, who's not expecting it. He's actually the only receiver on that team that has managed to stay healthy. So if the other two wide receivers do struggle with some sort of injury, his target market share likely to increase, even though Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods, it could make you nervous about owning one of them because you know there are 3 really good options. His role is just going to be a little bit different. There's always going to be a place for him in the game plan. And also, that was year 1. Okay, we always talk about how receivers that change teams, they do have some growing pains, some trouble accommodating to the offense. Brandon Cooks did it well in 1 year. Imagine what he can do with another year under his belt and even more weapons on the team. Chris Godwin, don't need to talk too much about him. We kind of mentioned it, a lot of the same stuff with Mike Evans. You're going to get a lot more targets. He is just incredible as an athlete. We've been saying it all offseason, so I'm not going to bore you with it. And I understand it may seem a little bit scary taking a wide receiver 2, the only wide receiver 2 that's really drafted at this point besides somebody like Adam Thielen versus Diggs. So that's really saying something about Godwin, and there's really no other wide receiver 2 that you could put above him. So he's a premier option at the position in an offense that's going to be throwing a lot and already had the best quarterback wide receiver duos when it came to fantasy last year. So there's so much to love. The risk isn't that much at all. And when comparing him to the other receivers in the range, I really can't argue that any of them have a much higher ceiling. Maybe Robert Woods, but if we were on the clock, Godwin versus Woods, we're taking Godwin. The final player, Kenny Golladay, and he's basically a breakout wide receiver incoming. You know, they got Darrell Bevell, who's going to lead this team into being a defensive-minded and run-first team. He coached for Seattle when the Marshawn Lynch beast mode stuff was going on. He was coaching for Adrian Peterson. So he has a lot of history at making running backs valuable. Don't let that hold you back from drafting Kenny Golladay. That would be a mistake. And what we look for first, opportunity, yes. But ability to be able to produce and outproduce those 2 wide receivers who have been the anchors of this entire team for years, that's really impressive, and he looked good doing it. He actually crossed the 1,000-yard threshold, which is a feat not many wide receivers end up getting to say. 70 receptions, 5 touchdowns. You know he's a good guy in the red zone. It just feels like one of the safer picks because you know that the volume's going to be there week in and week out, and Marvin Jones has been banged up recently. You're talking massive upside. But that's the last wide receiver we have within the first 4 rounds, so that will do it. Odell Beckham, Michael Thomas, Julio Jones, Mike Evans, Amari Cooper, Brandon Cooks, Chris Godwin, Kenny Golladay. You guys better own some of those players in your league. But we really appreciate you guys stopping by. So how about we hit that like button, subscribe if we are new. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.